A routine stop or a death sentence. FBI Director Jessica Monroe knew the law, enforced it. But when a power-hungry cop pulled her over, everything spiraled into a fight for survival. Gun drawn, witness recording, the system exposed. Will justice prevail or will the truth be buried like so many before? Watch till the end to find out. Like and subscribe for more shocking, true stories. Darkness on the open road. The night stretched endlessly before her, a lonely strip of highway cutting through the vast expanse of nothingness. The road was quiet, too quiet. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic clicking of the tires against the pavement were the only sounds accompanying Jessica Monroe as she drove through the darkness. She wasn't just any driver. She was the newly appointed director of the FBI, a position earned through years of grit, intellect, and the ability to stay two steps ahead of danger. But right now she wasn't thinking about power. She was thinking about exhaustion. The classified briefing she had just left was still spinning in her mind. A national security threat, a web of deception, a case that could shake the country's foundation. She had spent hours in a closed-room meeting with the Attorney General and high-ranking officials, dissecting intelligence reports and counterterrorism strategies. Her job was to hunt criminals, to bring down corruption, to enforce the law. But in the next few minutes, she would find herself on the other side of the badge. A flicker of red and blue lit up her rearview mirror, snapping her out of her thoughts. A police cruiser was tailing her, its siren off but its lights flashing ominously. Jessica's hands instinctively tightened around the steering wheel. Her eyes flicked to the speedometer. 65. Exactly the speed limit. Her pulse remained steady, but her instincts sharpened. This wasn't normal. Her car was sleek but unmarked, a government-issued black sedan. Nothing flashy, nothing suspicious. No reason for a cop to stop her, yet the cruiser didn't back off. Instead, it clung to her bumper like a predator, waiting for its prey to make the wrong move. Jessica exhaled slowly through her nose, flipping on her turn signal. She guided the vehicle onto the shoulder, keeping her movements precise and deliberate. The years of working alongside law enforcement told her one thing: always control the situation before it controls you. As the car rolled to a stop, a foreboding silence settled over the empty stretch of highway. She adjusted her rearview mirror, trying to get a glimpse of the officer. Nothing. Whoever was behind the wheel was taking their time. Too much time. That's when the unease started, a whisper in the back of her mind, a feeling not of fear, but of calculated awareness. She had seen cases like this before. Reports, footage, testimonies from victims who never got justice, and she wasn't about to be the next one. The driver's door of the cruiser finally creaked open. A man stepped out, tall, broad, and moving with the kind of confidence that wasn't just authority, it was ownership. Jessica didn't recognize him, but she didn't need to. She had seen his type before. His posture was rigid, his left hand resting near his firearm as if it were a natural extension of his body. In his right hand, a flashlight swayed back and forth like a pendulum, its beam cutting through the night. She rolled down the window, keeping both hands visible on the wheel. The golden rule. "Evening, officer." Her voice was steady, professional, void of anything that could be mistaken for fear. The officer, Brian Keller, leaned down just enough for the light to catch his face. His jaw worked lazily as he chewed a piece of gum, eyes scanning her like he was looking for a crack in her armor. Then, without so much as a greeting, he muttered, "License and registration." Jessica didn't move right away. No reason given, no explanation, no standard protocol. Something wasn't right. Her training had drilled instinct into her, patterns, behaviors, power dynamics. She knew when something was off, and this was off. She kept her voice even. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" A long pause. Then Keller simply repeated himself, this time slower, as if talking to someone hard of hearing. "License. Registration." Jessica had been in rooms with terrorists, interrogated killers, negotiated with foreign intelligence agents. But this man, this small-time cop with a badge and a hunger for control, was trying to make her small. She could feel it. Still, she followed protocol. De-escalate first. Stay in control. "Officer, I'm reaching for my wallet on the passenger seat." Silence. She moved slowly, keeping her motions measured. Retrieving her wallet, she pulled out two cards, her driver's license and her FBI credentials. She extended them toward him. Keller didn't take them. Instead, his eyes flickered across the badge. His lips barely moved, but she caught the sneer in his voice. "FBI, huh?" Jessica nodded once. "Yes, sir." Another pause. Longer this time. Then his eyes hardened. "Step out of the vehicle." The words hit like a slap. Jessica blinked. "Excuse me?" Keller took half a step back, his hand now fully hovering over his gun. "I said, step out of the car." And just like that, the situation shifted. Jessica felt it in her bones. This wasn't a traffic stop anymore. This was a power play, a trap. She inhaled slowly, keeping her heartbeat steady. Think, calculate, stay ahead. Because if she made one wrong move, she wouldn't be the one writing the report tomorrow. They would, and the story would be very different. The trap titans Jessica Monroe had spent her career reading people, dissecting their motivations, their fears, their weaknesses. Right now, she was reading Officer Brian Keller, and what she saw was dangerous. This man wasn't following protocol. This wasn't about law enforcement. This was about power, and Jessica wasn't about to hand it over. She kept her body still, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, her eyes locked onto Keller's. "On what grounds, officer?" Her voice was calm, measured, unshaken. For the first time, Keller hesitated. His lips parted like he was searching for a response. But instead of answering, he did something worse. He took a step closer. The flashlight in his hand remained trained on her face, blinding her to everything but his shadowed silhouette. "I don't have to explain myself to you." Jessica didn't blink. "Actually, you do." His jaw clenched. She could see the muscle working beneath his skin, the irritation building. He wasn't used to being questioned. He wasn't used to losing control. That was dangerous. Jessica could feel the shift, the moment where things turned from intimidation to threat. She had seen it in interrogation rooms, in men who needed control more than they needed reason. And now she was staring one down on the side of an empty highway. Then Keller's lips curled into something resembling amusement. "Lady, I don't give a damn who you work for." Jessica inhaled, slow and steady. He was trying to push her, trying to get her to react. She wouldn't. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, keeping her expression unreadable. "Then let's call your supervisor, see if he does." That's when Keller snapped. The flashlight dropped from his hand, clattering against the pavement. His free hand slammed against the roof of her car, hard. The sudden bang echoed in the night, sharp and violent. Jessica didn't flinch, but her fingers twitched, instinct screaming at her to move, to defend, to do something. Keller's other hand flexed near his holster. He was considering it. That single realization sent a slow burn through Jessica's veins. Not fear, rage, not for herself, for every other person who had been in this position, for every person who never got to tell their side of the story. She wasn't going to be one of them. She was about to speak, about to make her next move. When a new variable entered the equation, a second set of headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. Another patrol car. Jessica felt something close to relief. Another officer meant another witness. It meant accountability. But then she saw who stepped out. A second cop, taller than Keller, broad-shouldered, with no visible nameplate on his uniform. He strode toward them, his face unreadable, his posture calm. Too calm. Keller didn't even glance back, and that told Jessica everything she needed to know. This wasn't backup. This was reinforcement. The second officer stopped beside Keller, his gaze flicking between them before settling on Jessica. "Problem here?" he asked casually. Keller smirked. "Just dealing with a non-compliant driver." Jessica's stomach twisted, but she didn't let it show. She was outnumbered now, and Keller knew it. The second officer took a small step forward, his presence shifting the balance of power. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Not FBI Director Monroe, not even Miss Monroe, just ma'am. Jessica had been in war rooms, in hostile negotiations, in rooms where a single word could change the course of a nation. This felt worse, because this wasn't a battlefield. This was home. And right now, home felt just as dangerous. Her breath remained even, her pulse steady, but her mind was already calculating. She could refuse. They would escalate. She could comply. She would be at their mercy. There was no good choice, only survival. The second officer's voice came again, deceptively calm. "Step out of the car now." Jessica exhaled through her nose. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached for the door handle. The moment her feet hit the pavement, she knew she was in real danger. The cold night air bit against her skin. But it wasn't the chill that made her shiver. It was the realization that Keller had positioned himself just enough to block her car's dash cam. And the second officer had angled himself behind her, covering any blind spots. They had done this before? Many times. Keller smirked. "Turn around." Jessica didn't move. "You still haven't told me why I'm being detained." Keller's nostrils flared. "Suspicious behavior?" "What behavior?" He smirked again, shaking his head like she was just another problem to deal with. "Refusing to comply." Jessica's jaw clenched. It was a trap. Refusing to comply would justify escalation. Complying would mean submission. She knew the game. She had read the reports. Then Keller grabbed her wrist. Too hard, too fast. Her instincts kicked in immediately. Her body shifted just enough to pull back without appearing aggressive. "Get your hands off me." Her voice sliced through the night like a blade. Keller didn't let go. The second officer took a step closer. "We got a problem here?" Keller's grip tightened. "I think she's resisting." Jessica's stomach turned. And then the gun came out. Keller didn't hesitate. His hand dropped to his holster. The snap unfastened. The barrel was inches from her face. Time stretched thin, warping around them. Jessica had stared down terrorists, cartel leaders, mass murderers. But this was different, because this wasn't an enemy combatant. This was an American cop, and he was looking at her like she was already dead. She kept her breath even, her hands up, her mind moving faster than ever before. The silence was suffocating. Then Keller spoke. "Do you feel powerful now?" Jessica felt something inside her shift. This had never been about a traffic stop. This was about humiliation. Her vision tunneled. Not from fear, from rage. But before she could speak, a voice cut through the night. "Hey, I'm recording this!" A stranger's voice, sharp, forceful, unyielding. Jessica barely turned her head, just enough to see him. A man stood on the roadside, phone raised high, screen glowing. He wasn't just watching, he was witnessing. And for the first time, so was the world. The breaking point. The moment that voice cut through the night, sharp, unwavering, full of defiance, the power shifted. Not by much, but enough. Jessica saw it, and more importantly, so did Keller. His grip on the gun twitched, not lowering it, not yet, but that fraction of hesitation was all she needed to know, that he wasn't as invincible as he thought he was. A crack had formed, and she was going to drive a wedge straight through it. But before she could, Keller snarled, snapping his head toward his partner. "Brooks, get him to stop recording. Now!" Jessica's stomach dropped. She knew what that meant. Brooks didn't hesitate. He turned, already moving toward the witness, his hand reaching for something on his belt. Jessica's heart slammed against her ribs. This was escalating fast. If Brooks reached him before backup arrived, the man recording, the only proof she had, was about to be silenced. "No!" Jessica's voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. She stepped forward before she even realized she was doing it. Keller instantly swung the gun back toward her. "Move again, and you're dead." For the first time that night, Jessica felt it, a sliver of fear curling around her spine like smoke. But she didn't stop, didn't blink, didn't dare look away from Keller, because she knew exactly what he was thinking. He was panicking now. For the first time, he wasn't in control. And a man like him, desperation made him even more dangerous. She kept her hands up, her voice steady. "You pull that trigger, and it won't just be career-ending. It'll be life-ending. Yours. Do you understand me?" Keller didn't move. His finger hovered near the trigger, shaking slightly. But he hadn't pulled it yet. That meant she still had time. Time to turn this around. Jessica squared her stance, standing taller, making herself unshakable. Put the weapon down, Officer Keller. Silence. The wind howled through the empty stretch of highway. Then, a new sound. Sirens. Close. Too close. Jessica saw it in Keller's face the second he heard them. That flash of something primal in his eyes. Panic. Realization. He was out of time. His next move would decide everything. For both of them. For all of them. But Jessica wasn't going to give him the chance to make it. She took one last step forward. She lowered her voice, making it firm, unyielding. It's over. Put it down. The sirens were a roar now, red and blue lights bouncing off the pavement. More patrol cars skidded to a stop, officers spilling out onto the scene. And that's when it happened. Keller's fingers finally uncurled from the grip of his gun, slowly, deliberately. But his expression never changed, even as he holstered the weapon, even as reality crashed down around him. He still thought he was untouchable. Jessica was about to prove him wrong. The reckoning, a voice cut through the chaos, commanding, sharp. Director Monroe? Jessica turned. A man stepped forward. A lieutenant, his insignia catching the flashing lights. The instant recognition hit him. His face paled. She didn't waste a second. I want these officers detained, right now. The lieutenant hesitated, just for a breath, and then nodded sharply. Cuff them. The order rippled through the ranks like a shockwave. Keller's mouth parted, disbelief flashing across his face. You've got to be kidding me. But the officers weren't kidding. Hands grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back. For the first time in his life, Keller was the one in cuffs. Jessica watched, expression unreadable, as he was yanked away from her. Brooks didn't resist. He just stared at the ground, like a man who had finally realized he had bet on the wrong side. Jessica inhaled deeply. She had won, but this wasn't just about her. It never had been. This wasn't about one bad cop. This was about an entire system that let them thrive, and she wasn't about to let that slide. Not anymore. Justice unfolds. The night didn't end there. Jessica stood on the side of the highway as Internal Affairs was called in. As the officers reviewed the footage, and as Mark Reynolds, the man who had saved her life by recording everything, stood silently, still holding his phone. Jessica turned to him. Their eyes met. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe. You good? Mark asked. Jessica gave a small, slow nod. Thanks to you. He hesitated. Then he muttered something that hit harder than anything Keller had said that night. They do this all the time, just not to someone like you. Jessica clenched her jaw, because he was right. And that truth? That hurt more than anything that had happened tonight. The fallout by dawn, the footage was everywhere. By noon, the Justice Department had launched a formal investigation. Keller was stripped of his badge, booked for assault with a deadly weapon. Brooks was suspended indefinitely. The police department released a statement, one of those carefully worded damage control ones. But it didn't matter. The world had already seen the truth, and the truth had consequences. Jessica watched the news coverage from her office later that day, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. The phone on her desk buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Normally she wouldn't answer. Tonight she did. Director Monroe. A pause, then a voice she recognized. Mark Reynolds. Just wanted to say, I appreciate what you're doing. Jessica exhaled slowly. Most people wouldn't. Another pause, then, quietly, most people don't have the power to. Jessica leaned back. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope. Because justice doesn't happen in silence. It happens when people refuse to look away. And tonight, the whole world had been watching. The fight beyond one night. The video hit the internet before sunrise. By morning, it was on every major news channel. By noon, the Justice Department had released a statement calling for a full and immediate review of the incident. By midnight, the protests had started. The nation watches Jessica Monroe sat in her office, the glow of her laptop screen reflecting off her face. The footage from the highway played on every single news network. Keller's gun inches from her face, the tremble in his grip. The moment he realized he was being recorded. She should have felt victorious, but instead, she felt uneasy because she knew how these stories ended. The system bends, but it rarely breaks. And right now, the system was scrambling, trying to contain the damage, trying to make this go away. Her phone buzzed again. Another politician calling, another leader asking if she planned to let this blow over. Jessica exhaled sharply, rubbing her temple. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about one night. This was about all the nights before it, and the ones that would come after, if nothing changed. She clicked refresh on her screen. The latest headlines flashed in front of her. FBI Director targeted in unjustified police stop. Cop pulled gun on FBI Director. How many others have been silenced? Systemic reform or political theater? What happens next? And then, one headline that made her sit up straighter. Officer Keller refuses to accept plea deal, claims he did nothing wrong. Jessica's stomach tightened. She should have seen this coming. Keller wasn't just going to go quietly. He was doubling down, and that meant this wasn't over. The system strikes back. 2 days later, the police union released their own statement. Officer Keller is a decorated public servant. The attacks on his character are politically motivated. We stand by him. Jessica read it 3 times, each time feeling her jaw clench tighter. They weren't defending him because he was right. They were defending him because admitting he was wrong meant admitting the system was broken. And they couldn't afford that. Not publicly. Not when the entire nation was watching. A few hours later, the governor of the state held a press conference. His tone was measured, his words carefully chosen. While we take this incident very seriously, we must also respect the due process of all officers involved. Let's not rush to judgment. Jessica scoffed. Rush to judgment? If that video didn't exist, they would have rushed to bury her 6 feet under. She knew exactly what was happening. They were waiting for public outrage to die down, waiting for the news cycle to shift, waiting for people to forget. But she wasn't going to let them. Jessica makes her move the next morning. She walks straight into the Department of Justice headquarters, past the reporters, past the politicians whispering in hallways, straight to the Attorney General's office. She didn't sit. She didn't waste time. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "We're charging Keller." The Attorney General leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "Jessica, no." She cut him off. "Don't tell me this is political. Don't tell me we need to be careful. This isn't just about me. This is about every person who didn't have the power to push back." Silence stretched between them. Then a sigh, and 3 words that made her chest tighten. "It won't be easy." Jessica's eyes hardened. Justice never is. The trial and the nation's verdict. Weeks passed, then months. The case went to trial. Keller stood in court, still convinced he had done nothing wrong, still convinced that the system would protect him. Jessica sat in the front row, watching as evidence was laid out. The video, the testimony, the years of complaints against him that had been quietly dismissed. For once, the system couldn't ignore it. And when the jury returned their verdict, guilty, Jessica felt the weight in her chest finally ease. But she knew this was just one battle. The war was far from over. One last phone call. The night the trial ended, her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. Then she saw the number. Mark Reynolds. She picked up. "Jessica Monroe." A pause. Then his voice, quiet, steady, but firm. "You did what most people wouldn't." Jessica stared out her office window, looking at the city lights stretching endlessly before her. "Most people don't have the power to." A beat of silence. Then Mark spoke again, this time with something deeper in his tone. "You do. So what happens next?" Jessica didn't answer right away. She thought about it, really thought about it. Then she made a decision. "We burn the whole system down." Click, the line went dead, and Jessica Monroe turned to face the next fight.